PSBA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Thank you all for coming and spending your lunch hour with us. And we're so delighted to have Tia as our speaker for our March conversation. But before we get started, I do want to acknowledge Puget Sound book artists for sponsoring these lunchtime talks. We've been doing these since COVID, and they've really helped us learn and be inspired to reach out to so many wonderful artists. And we want to thank everyone who's participated in joining the conversations that we're having at lunchtime and for helping us connect with book artists across the country. Our membership dues support these very important presentations, and we want to thank you for being part of that and for supporting book artists across the nation. It's so great to have you here too, Debbie. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Jane. I'm really happy to be here, and it's a real treat to be able to welcome Tia Blassingame. And I'm going to take just a moment here to introduce you and share with you all a little bit about her background. So Tia is an associate professor of book arts at Scripps College and the director of the Scripps College Press. She's an accomplished artist with an international reputation. Tia received her BA in architecture from Princeton University, an MA in book arts from Corcoran College of Art and Design, and an MFA in printmaking from Rhode Island School of Design. And in 2019, Tia founded the Book Print Artist Scholar of Color Collective. It has over 40 members, and it brings Black, Indigenous, and people of color into the conversation and collaboration with scholars of BIPOC book history and print culture to build a community and support systems.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Tia, you have so many accomplishments. To add to what Debbie's already said, in 2023, Tia co-curated the National Endowment for the Arts and Center for Crafts grant-awarded Paper for People, Decolonizing Global Paper Cultures, a traveling paper-making exhibit that was held at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts and the San Francisco Center for Books. And in 2022, she actually curated a show locally, Troubling, Artist Books That Enlighten and Disrupt Old Ways of Being and Seeing exhibit at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. Most recently, Tia was the printer-in-resident at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, England.
So Tia describes her work as reconstructing charged images and histories by employing book arts and printmaking techniques for a nuanced discussion on issues of race and racism. I hope you all will join me in welcoming Tia. Tia.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janet, Debbie, Lynn, for that great introduction. Thank you, Puget Sound Book Arts membership, for the invitation and for giving me some of your time. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my practice, or kind of three components of my practice. So I'm going to kind of get into it. So research, library acquisitions, or what I'm listing as intentional collecting, and then commissioning. And I'll probably spend most of my time in commissioning to share a new project. But research, just kind of a little bit to introduce myself. So I'm sharing, sharing a project, Harvest, Holding, and Trading, And it's one of actually several kind of connected projects that come out of research that I had the opportunity to do at Brown University, specifically the John Carter Brown Library, looking at the business enterprises of the Brown family, specifically the Brown brothers, one of which was slave trading. And so one of the sort of opportunities that I had at doing research at that library was to actually handle the material. And that actually, that opportunity to actually handle the material, I think kind of gave me a way into the project. In many ways, I had kind of a sort of physical response, emotional response, and that kind of moved the work forward as well. So in this case, you know, having the chance to look at these receipts, sort of these slips of paper that are really representing the sale of people. And so this piece from, I believe, 1758, and I'm going to move forward to show kind of how I translated that into a book page. So for this project, it's a little convoluted. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on this project, but one part of this project was actually collecting leaves and scanning and screen printing those leaves. So what you see, this sort of image is actually one of the screen printed leaves that I collected. And then the sort of burnout of the text that's coming sort of excerpted from that receipt. In this case, this is a project that was additioned, and the sort of main addition, which I'm not showing, was very colorful, sort of many shades of kind of browns, so a little bit kind of garish compared to this. And then in this case, and that was additioned also. But in this case, this is a unique piece. So sort of while I was printing and editioning, that sort of more colorful version, I was also printing this sort of like one that was much less colorful. So again, some more of the accounting around the slave trading business of the Brown family. And then some more pages of this unique version of harvest, holding, and trading. Again, with the imagery coming from the leaves that were collected, and then kind of excerpting some of the receipts that I was looking at in the library. And then sort of continuing in this sort of research, part of, I guess, the situation that I found myself in with this research is that the material was kind of overwhelming. There was, you know, almost everything related to the businesses seemed to have been kept, every slip of paper. And that was very overwhelming, but it also gave me different ways of kind of looking and sort of categorizing the material, whether it was while sort of reading through the material, trying to take down any names of enslaved people that I came across, sort of facts that I could start to glean from that research, connections between different enslaved peoples. And so out of that, the sort of series of kind of note cards that I was starting to keep to kind of make sense of the information. Slavery's historic house signs came from that research. So sort of the same research that sort of underpins harvest. And in this case, it's meant to be kind of like a alternative family tree. In this case, it's a scroll or fabric scroll. So the main sort of blue with the text is cyanotype on cotton, and then bounded and backed with velvet. And sort of part of the work that I was doing of collecting the leaves was sort of walking this same street, Benefit Street, College Hill and Providence, and, recognizing there were many of the historic houses, and the signs were tied to typically the male house owner, so the white male house owner, and sort of trying to connect that sort of family tree structure through the use of sort of an alternative house signs. So the first name is the name of the enslaved person, tying them to the Brown family. And then the smaller text underneath is some fact that I have about them. So some might be when they arrived, some might be some strange incident that occurred. It might be that where they were born, if they were born here. Maybe they were the son of a person that was referenced in an earlier panel. But this was, really sort of helped to sort of, instead of having this, many index cards, it becomes more cohesive. So as was mentioned, last fall, I had the chance to be the printer in residence at the Bodleian Libraries and their bibliographical press. So this is a view of the courtyard outside of the studio. And I remember as a kid visiting and being one of those, and probably very loud, one of the visitors to this area and being kind of in awe. So it was interesting to be there. Not necessarily like a tour group. And then the doorway is the doorway to the studio. On the right, I'm hoping you can see, is a nice handset print-up that they created for different events. So whether it's a letterpress class, and then my talk as well, one of the talks that I gave. So one of the projects that I did while I was at the Bodleian was a project that I'm working on now, and it's a continuation of a project that has sort of several books in it, and it's meant to be kind of a handbook. There's Colored a handbook, African American a handbook, the last is Black a handbook, and I'm sort of continuing out that series. And so part of what I did during my time was actually try to, and all except for the first in the series are sort of underpinned with paste paper. And so attempting to edition paste paper and then printing on that. So here you see some of the paste paper still kind of wet. Some of the paste paper drying, and of course their studio has gorgeous view of the Radcliffe camera, which I know is kind of exciting for me. So whenever you're sort of stuck, you can look out the window or get out and kind of walk around that sort of beautiful historic campus. But part of what I had the opportunity to do also was to look at some historical documents, in this case, looking at documents tied to a sugar plantation in Barbados. And so similar to the work that I was doing kind of around harvest, sort of starting with trying to kind of decipher the text and kind of find a way into the project. In this case, looking at the sort of accounting, their accounting books, some letters also that the library had gotten recently. And I have to say the librarians were very helpful just in sort of sharing documentation that they had recently gotten and might not have been cataloged, and assisting me in locating materials. And I have to say, this was very interesting in kind of a different way from the harvest materials in that, these materials kind of had an overpowering kind of aroma, as well as various degrees of kind of fragility as well, and then also varying degrees of legibility, which I found, I think maybe a little stressful, maybe a little bit more stressful than I had in the Harvest project, because I had a finite amount of time to sort of find a way in, or find how I might use the documentation, or the documentation might influence my project. But one of the great things that I had an opportunity to do was kind of to sort of share the work that I was doing. And so having the chance to, on the same tables, have some of the historical documents that I was looking at with some of the paste paper that I was working on was invaluable. So it was kind of the first time that I had seen the two materials together at a time when I was sort of questioning color scheme as well, and sort of the direction that I was taking with the paste paper. So that was kind of nice to have that validation, as well as kind of moving around the campus and the city, and even looking out of the window and sort of having the color scheme that I had been thinking about and working in sort of reflected in the buildings as well. And this is very much a project that is still kind of ongoing. I'm sort of moving at a point where I'm doing some editing of the writing. I have one piece that I'm struggling with a little bit, similar to the previous handbooks in the series. It'll be a mix of digital and letterpress printed. So I'm pretty close, not quite ready to print yet, but I think in the next couple weeks I will start printing and sort of finish up this series. So more to come. But I want to talk kind of briefly around intentional collecting. In 2021, I received the John and Chester Fund Award. And that was for the purchase of some of my Primrose Press publications from University of Illinois, Chicago Library. And I would say that that was very important and is very important. So that was an acquisition of approximately 30 of my works. So one of which is a love story, which is sort of kind of like a love letter, my love letter to the book arts field, but also sort of takes you through kind of my process of making the artist's books that I make that have a focus on race and racism. Another was a mock-up for Gun-Shy, which is a artist book that I'd done in 2021. That's a mix of etchings. The final piece was letterpress printed, and then the covers are covered with upcycled clothing. In this case, as a mock-up, it has the sort of test etchings, and then my kind of handwritten sort of layout of the text. Also another early piece, Past, Present, DC. In this case, some of the photolitho and etching plates, the proof prints, some of the samples of the handmade paper were part of that acquisition. A more recent print, pressure print, No Human Being. So it's a nice range of work between print work, artist books. So one of my works, You Are, which includes pressure print portraits with letterpress captions, as well as some lithographs. And you see the sort of bottom 2/3 are actually cyanotype proofs on paper that were for the slavery's house signs. And I would say this, you know, to me is important because in this case, this library becomes a repository for my work, and so makes it accessible for students, of course, but also for researchers as well. And then some of the handbooks, more recent handbooks. Colored as well as African American were also part of that. And I'm going to move on to commissioning because I'd like to spend actually most of my time there. So I'll give kind of a brief background around the Bookprint Artist Scholar of Color Collective, or Bookprint Collective, and then move into our most recent work tied to commissioning. So the Bookprint, I'm going to say Bookprint Collective, you know, we bring together BIPOC book artists, paper makers, curators, letterpress printers. You know, we have a growing number of children's book illustrators as well, into conversation and collaboration with scholars of BIPOC book history and print culture. The purpose of that is to build community as well as support systems. And it's really our shared passion for book arts and the unique potential of artist books as vehicles for social change and racial unity that really grounds us. And then our current and future collaborations across media continue to kind of shift and morph as the group grows and as our connections deepen. And as was said before, we're a little over 40 members. And hopefully you've recognized some of our lovely and talented members, and a few you'll see again in this presentation. So I'll sort of pause here, and this sort of, I'll mention this again. So last year, one of our members, Radha Pandey, and her partner received a grant to offer 2-week artist residencies to 6 of our members, as well as 6 members from Artist Collective in India. A total of 6 artists. 3 of our members went last year, including myself. And then this year, 6 members total. It's 6 artists total. 3 of our members will participate next year. And the 3 members that will be participating this year, we'll start with Jerusha Graham toward the end of May, Devin Fitzgerald in June, and then Myron Beasley in July. And I'll come back to this shortly. So I want to talk a little bit about, give a little background for the commission that I'll be speaking about for the rest of my talk. So in 2022, 3 of us had an opportunity to serve as the Charles W. Mann Jr. Lecturer in Book Arts at Penn State through their Eberly Family Special Collections Library. After that talk, the library reached out because they were interested in commissioning some new work from us. And we were all interested. I felt it would be nice to have include one more member. So we invited Amy Lee, who's a hanji maker, paper maker. And that sort of was the sort of impetus of our talk. And sort of thinking around what we would do and what it might be about. Tamar, during her, and I'll go back, during her section of the talk, had referenced something that I had spoken to her about kind of at the height of the pandemic, specifically around teaching a studio class online, and really feeling it was important for me to connect with students in a way that they could see me making, specifically that they could see a brown person, brown hands making. And just talking about how I spent a lot of time sort of making demonstration videos, and not necessarily just sharing videos of other artists, that I felt it was important that we couldn't be present, that it really was important for them to see that. And sort of going back to that, thinking, well, maybe there was something there kind of in that comment that we could work from, around the visibility or the sort of erasure of Black and brown people making and creating, with a focus on their handwork and their creativity. So we proposed a print portfolio with that focus. We met for the better part of last year, regularly about every month or so, whether it was sort of sharing inspiration, in some cases, Amy Lee sharing paper samples, sort of sharing kind of our experience around seeing or being introduced to Black and brown people making, specifically in printmaking, and really kind of checking in. To my thinking, I felt like it could be the kind of thing that we might be able to replicate, and replicate with other members to have a larger conversation. So a big part of what we were doing is sort of creating the parameters around that. How many would we make? How big would it be? What was the way in for everyone into that theme? Was it very rigid? Was there more openness to it? So it really ended up being something where with the four of us, we each created a print. Tamar shared a written reflection that sort of kind of grounded the whole project. And I'll kind of read a part of what she wrote. Ben Blount, Tia Blassingame, Amy Lee, all hands of color, all artists of color with their hands engaged in artistic expression and social change through book arts. The affinity for craft and method for each initiates a threshold for extraordinary power. And I'll sort of going back to that residency at Halden Bookworks. So during my time, and you see an image of some of the letterpress section of the studio, I had my idea kind of worked out for my print, but I kind of wanted to test it out. So starting from sketches of hands, I felt like I had the hands worked out, the placement worked out. I wrote some text and had a section that I was going to pressure print. You kind of see a little bit better kind of in the middle ground. And printed it, was happy with it, but I didn't think that was the print. We had already agreed upon a size for the print, so I printed at these at, I think they were 8.5 by 11, so letter size. So to me, that helped me kind of work out what was working, what wasn't working, or what was interesting to me and not interesting to me. And so sort of, one of the projects that I worked on at Halden was sort of working out this print. I'm also testing out different papers as well. So while I like the print, I knew it wasn't quite for the portfolio. And I have to say, sort of part of my last year between the two residencies was a little nerve-wracking just in shipping materials between, from the States to Norway, Norway to the UK, and then UK back. Sort of hoping that things kind of make it through and don't get kind of damaged or anything. So that was an interesting sort of addition to the process for me. And also kind of getting acclimated to other people's print shops too. So this is the finish, and I'll sort of start with showing you kind of like the finished portfolio and prints, and then I'll move back into process for the prints. So this is the portfolio, the container. And so you flip it up. Inside there's a little pocket booklet. The booklet includes Tamar's written reflection, as well as artist statements, bios, some images of process from the artists as well, and then a brief introduction from me. Here's a spread of the book. This is for Ben Blount's print with his lovely lockup. There's my sort of finished print. So you see those same hands now with a different text. And now it's we work in silence, we work in song, hands conspicuously black and brown, printing histories, binding lineage together, evident, in silence, in song. Now we have Ben's print. We start to see Amy's piece, and then there it is fully. So I'm going to kind of move back into process now. So this is another image of the sort of test prints that I made at Halden Bookworks. So you see those hands, those are kind of just the outline of hands, sort of color in the hands, sort of different background and shape, sort of in the center, different text. That sort of tester, I make these for Black people. You don't need to see my hands making to feel that I take the pain and triumph to spin gold. And then moving into process for the portfolio print, which is titled Black and Brown Hands. And so the size of the prints for the portfolio are 10.5 by 15 3/4. And the reasoning for that size is we actually took that from the size of mold and decal that Amy was going to use. The future sort of versions of this will be a more standardized size. So some of the ink that I'm mixing, I'll move this up. Here you see that first layer, which is the pressure printed background with that nice patterning. On top of that, starting to print the second layer, so color in one of the hands. There's it printed. I think that's on a little tester. See some color for another hand. There are some of the prints drying in the studio. There you see that top layer on that hand, and I'll go back. So that first layer, then the sort of sketch hand on top. And then you start to see the makings of the two hands together. So here you see one of the hands. So it has that background of the pressure print. In this case, I'm using a kitchen drawer liner. And so some of that waviness is coming from the kind of sponginess of that material. And then you see the hand, so that sort of base color, and then the sort of pattern you see on the press as well. That second layer of the hand with the nice little bit of a rainbow roll. You see the letterpress form inked up. Always fun to use someone else's typefaces. And then the finished print. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Let Tamar speak again. The power of the printed word, richly mediated by letterpress, all place brown hands in book arts in the texture of narrative and the context of imagination with contemporary struggle and cultural identity. So up top, you see an image of me typesetting for my piece. To the right, you see the wooden type set for Ben Blount's print, and I'm going to keep going on to Ben's work. Ben's print is called Show Me Your Hands, and it includes wood type with polymer plates for the figure, so the hands. You see the start with his sort of sketch of hands. We see the second layer, polymer of hands being printed. And I'll kind of let Ben speak for himself as I move forward. Show Your Hands features overlapping drawings of open hands that are letterpress printed from polymer plates. The overall color palette is various shades of brown, including the paper, the printed text. Show me your hands. The text has a dual meaning, referencing the visibility of artists of color, as well as the troubling history of police interactions with Black and brown communities. It's a call to action and exploration of the ideas of access and what it means to truly be seen. So we see images of the process printing for Ben's piece, as well as Amy Lee in the process of making paper. And I'll let Tamar speak again. The equations presented by book arts are never easy. Global lace bark traditions and Korean hand papermaking, the visibility of artists of color, and police interactions with Black and brown communities. So Amy's print is called Spreading Bark, and I'll take the sort of rest of my time to kind of move you through her process. And I'll kind of slow this down a little bit. So starting with breaking up the fiber, here she has kind of a dollop of dye where she's sort of coloring paper. I believe this is the cotton abaca paper, mixing. Here she is creating a sheet and pressing the sheet. And here are some of the finished sheets. And again, I'll let Amy speak a little bit. I tried to find, and actually I'm going to read this. I wanted to replicate the feeling of spreading a piece of cooked bark between my hands, how satisfying it is to see the natural crisscross of paper mulberry bast and how far it expands past its original width. So here you see she's taken some of the fibers and inked them. Here you can see the printing through the back of the paper that she's printing onto. So that's some of the paper that you saw her making. The cotton, I'm sorry, actually it's not, it's hanji. So here you see her pulling her print. Those are some prints drying. So now we're back to the paper that you saw her making, the cotton abaca. So now she's screen printing, and I'll go ahead and read some of her text. Spreading bark displays various names for bark cloth, bark lace, and other substrates made from the inner bast of plants by people worldwide, mostly from the global south, for thousands of years. Inner bark strips from trees like the paper mulberry, breadfruit, or fig that are pounded together. We'll sort of continue with process. So you see the screen that she's going to be printing on. She's written out the names of the various bark cloths, bark lace, bark papers, as well as hands. And I believe she printed these at Cleveland Institute of Art. So here's someone helping her with printing. Here are some of the sheets printed and drying. So again, this is the paper that you saw her making in the beginning. And keep going for time. And so this is the finished print. So in this case, you have two different papers that are coming together. The larger brown sheet with the hands, the sort of thumbs have been cut out to allow Amy to attach and kind of introduce the print, relief print on hanji, and bring that forward as well. And so around the sort of sides of the paper, you see the different names of bark papers, amato, amate, hun, kappa, tapa. But you're also able to find more information. So if you're sort of careful and you kind of pull down the relief printed hanji, you can see the name, the year, where she signed, further down, the edition size, as well as some thanks to people who assisted her as well. And so back to that image of the prints kind of together. And again, Tamar, the prints within this work come to us as complete and immediate narratives of the artist. And most recently, this is a print portfolio that's been available since about the beginning of the year. The folks at Penn State have their copies, as well as I believe we placed about 18 copies, which is exciting. Part of this project, I'm trying to do something a bit different from the typical print portfolio. So in this case, we're actually sharing the sales proceeds. So to me, that's very important, partly to help sort of stabilize the collective, but also to give support to member artists as well. And this is a project that will be kind of an ongoing conversation for at least 5 to 6 years, kind of as long as members are interested in participating. There's a new group that's working on a new print portfolio this year, still with the same focus of Black and brown hands, to sort of add to the conversation. And then really excited that Amy's print, Spreading Bark, is going to be in an exhibition in Hilo, Hawaii, called The Paths We Cross, Perspectives from the Korean Diaspora. And there's one last image of the portfolio, and I'll stop there, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions.
Tia, when you were talking about the Handbook for Extraordinary Power, I kept thinking that you're pretty extraordinary yourself, the body of work that you have, and the fact that you have put so much into creating collaborative work with fellow artists that provide a very important piece of history to the book arts and scholarship, which is a new field and so inspiring for so many. So thank you so much for that conversation and for all that you have contributed. And I know Debbie and I have been exchanging a few messages and kind of just saying, really, so much you've given us to think about and reflect upon, and to bring voices that have not been heard into the conversation, which is so important. So thank you very, very much. Debbie, I don't know if you want to build on any of my comments.
Well, I want to start with a question because I'm so taken by the collective project, and it's just wonderful. I feel like you have really set it up where it can expand and contract kind of based on who is involved in the project at the time, which in itself is quite a feat. I'm curious personally, for you engaging in that print project, what did you find really gave you energy in it, and what were maybe there was a piece of it that kind of challenged you? Just to know about what your personal experience was.
I mean, I think I was energized kind of around when the other participants were sharing their inspiration, and whether that was a specific artist or a specific artwork, that was very exciting. I think also when we were talking about our own experiences around sort of the presentation, or sometimes the lack of presentation or inclusion of Black and brown artists. I think for me particularly was around like graduate school, and how that presented, and that it was kind of problematic in many ways. So I think that was really exciting. I think to me, I'm excited about the prospects of this project and the sort of ongoing conversation. Just when I think about students, particularly undergraduate students, but not only, particularly Black and brown students, but not only, in that oftentimes there's a challenge to the work that they're doing or their presence, particularly in a book arts or printmaking field or degree program, in that it's almost presented as there's little to no history to sort of back up their presence there, or them having artistry or developing artistry, or particularly if they want to explore issues around identity and culture. And it feels like this project has the potential at least to maybe silence that and maybe buoy them as well, to say, like, you're not alone, you're not the first person who wanted to do X. There is a whole history, there is a whole present and future place for you, regardless of what someone else is saying. And I think the fact that it's visual like you can read the prints or not, but at some point it's sort of undeniable is exciting. Things that maybe were challenging. I think because our group was the first, that there were a lot of kind of mundane decisions that we needed to make for ourselves, to ideally set the project up to continue. Something like, what's the name of this gonna be? Or what's the dimensions of this gonna be? That are sometimes no one wants to speak up about those things because they don't want to be the one person who's like made the decision. So sometimes that was a little challenging.
Tia, we had a question come in from Mari Gower, and I was thinking on similar lines, and you've already touched upon this, but can you talk a little bit about your teaching practice, like working in the studio with students, and how you might not only engage them in the conversations you've just talked about, but also with doing primary research and using archival materials, and kind of expand about how you're bringing book arts to a new generation?
Sure. I mean, I guess I think about a seminar class that I taught. I'm not teaching it primarily or recently. It would have been for about 3 years. And it's a seminar class, but I feel like it's either a seminar class masquerading as a studio class or kind of the other way around. And we really kind of focused on issues of identity, race as well. We started in the library. And so we were kind of embedded in the library. Students had a lot of different things that they were going to do in the class, sometimes maybe too many things. But it really started from them actually reading the artist books, which shouldn't be shocking, but it kind of is shocking. Don't just look at the pretty pictures or get kind of seduced by the binding or the form. Like do that, but also read it. Like it can seduce you, but does it work? Does it make sense? And then actually them having an opportunity to interview some of the artists and kind of ask challenging questions, and kind of learning techniques and sort of kind of really critiquing the work of artists that are doing kind of social justice type book arts and prints. So I think that's kind of where my focus has been, and I feel like that has been successful. And then so sort of like the last half of the class, we kind of move into the studio. And these are students who most have never printed anything before, anything like that. So it's sort of a crash course in letterpress printing with some printing techniques as well. Another course similar, well, different but similar, so maybe similar vein. I taught during the pandemic when we were online, and it was through the art department, but also through Africana Studies. And our focus was on kind of understanding how Black artists use the book form, not necessarily just book artists, but Black artists, and really kind of getting a good understanding of how they were using it, and then students creating their own work. So, the subject matter was not necessarily Black themed, if that's what you want to call it. And students came from all different departments and backgrounds. But that's sort of how we were learning about artist books, was kind of through that lens. And that actually was quite interesting.
Fascinating. We are getting close to 1 o'clock, and I did want to also congratulate you and thank you for sharing the information about the University of Illinois purchase. As a librarian, it's so important for libraries to collect artist books and to make them available to students. And it's wonderful to know that your books have that are accessible to students. And I would like to just once again thank you so much. You are a very busy person, England, Norway, across the United States. We so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and I think we all have a lot to reflect upon and to think about. And everyone, please join me in a virtual thank you to Tia. And I'd like to say that our next Zoom conversation will be with a local artist, Mayor Blocker. So we're excited to have Mayor join us in April. And we are also planning a workshop at the end of April with Maureen Cummins. So if you haven't heard about that workshop, please go to our PSBA website and read the details. And thank you again, Tia, and
Thank
Debbie,
you very much.
and Lynn,
Thank
and
you.
all of you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.